Hello. Hi. So thank you for having a look again at our webinar this week, where every week we're kind of trying to touch on a few different topics, always kind of surrounding LimaCharlie, and for those kind of less aware around what LimaCharlie is. So we are a cloud security infrastructure as a service. So we allow you to kind of deploy in the cloud security infrastructure with EDR as a basis. So today, what specifically we wanted to talk about was the resources that are available to somebody starting with LimaCharlie, and that are free, essentially. So, very often as we onboard people, there's always the question around what can I get up and running with very quickly with minimal effort. LimaCharlie provides a huge amount of power and customization, and kind of really being able to own the detections and develop them and decide how they're applied and how automation works. But very often, for somebody who wants to try LimaCharlie, we want something that's just going to come up and work and give you some value and kind of learn from there on what that looks like. So with this in mind, we have kind of a list of different resources. We're going to go over what they are, what they'll give you, a little bit of information around the flavor, how to use them, and the type of value that they give you. So to start, here's what we're going to do. We are going to go in here. All right. So there's a couple of different categories of things that you can use to get up and running. So the first one is, obviously, as you get set up, create an organization, LimaCharlie. So it comes with a free tier of 2 sensors as well. So it's very useful to just kind of try and get up and running. The way that it works is that by default, you can think of it like AWS or Google Cloud Platform, is that, it's infrastructure that we make available. So by default, nothing is applied, nothing is going to automatically work for you. It's kind of a blank slate. Obviously, if you're an MSSP or a larger organization, you might have your kind of infrastructure as code configuration files that you can apply to your organizations, and you'll have a good base there. However, if you're just starting and you just want to start using a few things, the way that generally it works is that you will want to go into the add-ons section, and you will subscribe to things. So things could be services, they could be lookups, they could be APIs. And by subscribing to them, depending on what that resource is, that add-on that you're subscribing to, either things will happen automatically for you, or in some cases you'll have to, it will just give you access to those things, and then you'll have to add, a few things, usually DNR rules, detection and response rules, that we've covered in our previous webinar, to leverage those resources that you're using. So we're going to start by talking about the free ones, and the ones that, not the free ones, pardon me, but really the ones that will automatically take effect and do things for you. So there's really 2 big ones in that category. So those are called services in the add-ons. Add-ons resources, we'll use those 2 names a bit interchangeably. But services, which we've also covered in a previous webinar, tend to kind of bring 2 things together for you. The resource itself, the add-on itself, so like a threat feed or rules, and the DNR rules, the detection and response rules, so applying those to your organizations. So the first one to talk about is Sigma. So Sigma is an open source language that is agnostic of where it gets run. It allows you to do, for example, searches, in various products, and for various types of behavior. And they support multiple what they call backends. So essentially, translations of the rules. They have a repository where people contribute hundreds and hundreds of rules looking for various bad things. And there is a backend for LimaCharlie that allows you to take a Sigma rule, convert it to LimaCharlie. And yes, that's useful. That's an open source repo. However, what's even more useful is the Sigma service. And essentially what that is that in a continuous integration and deployment fashion, we mirror those rules in LimaCharlie, convert them to DNR rules for LimaCharlie. And by subscribing to the Sigma service, we always continuously update those into your organization. So by clicking subscribe, you get access to a huge list. If you want to see, the project itself, here's the URL. So it's on GitHub. You can go have a look. The rules, everything gets updated there. If you want to have a look at how those rules get translated into LimaCharlie, into DNR rules, this is the actual prod repo that is hooked into the CI/CD pipeline. And these are the LimaCharlie DNR rules that are converted and that will get applied in your organization. So sometimes even you might get a hit, a detection on one of those rules, and you want to know exactly, what is this looking for? You can start by looking at the LimaCharlie rules. So that's exactly what's going to be running on your organization. And if you want, you can go upstream to the Sigma rule, and you can even do PRs, so pull requests to suggest updates or maybe false positives and all that. So that is the Sigma service. So just click enable it, and then within a couple of minutes, everything will kind of get mirrored within your organization, and you will get detections. It's worth noting that. Like all things in security, especially when you're talking about generic things in the detection world, you will get false positives of some kind. We don't control Sigma, so we really just mirror it. And what that means is that as you enable Sigma, you should kind of mentally be ready that you will want to create a couple of false positive rules. Now, it's impossible to really kind of not prevent but pre-plan those. So really what you want to do is do a progressive rollout, enable the Sigma service, see what false positives come through, create a couple of rules, and very, very quickly you'll kind of eliminate the things that are of interest and that Sigma kind of has rules for, maybe detecting the truncation of Windows event files. But that perhaps in your organization or on specific hosts, they're normal. So you'll want to have a false positive rule set there. The second big useful service is the OTX. So OTX is the Open Threat Exchange, and that is from Alien Vault. So Alien Vault has the system OTX where people can contribute what they call pulses. And those are, essentially specialized threat feeds. So you might have a pulse for a specific botnet or something like that. You can, as part of OTX, you can create an account. It's free. You can register for those pulses. In LimaCharlie, if you want to use the OTX service, the prereq is that you will go in the integrations section. And you will want to add your API key there. So the API key is going to be provided by OTX. You go in integrations, add your key there, subscribe to the OTX service. And what's going to happen is that automatically the OTX service will go using the API, find all of the pulses that you have registered to, and import those in LimaCharlie. And it also has DNR rules, so detection response rules, that are generic for the various types of pulses. So if a pulse is like hashes or domain names, it will create the relevant rule to look for, to match those feeds with the data coming from your endpoints in LimaCharlie. So for example, if you have a feed that are hashes, it will look for those in the code identity event, which contain a bunch of different forms of the hashes. There is a maximum number of pulse. Again, kind of remember that in LimaCharlie, everything that we do is done wire speed, meaning when you have a DNR rule, it must be able to run in real time. It's not something that we can go and say, okay, look at the past year of data and start parsing that kind of in real time. That's just not possible. So we have services that allow you to do that, like the replay service, if you want to do that specifically. Replay old historical telemetry. But in this case, we limit it to about 200 pulses, where we grab all of the indicators of compromise in there, convert them to feeds, add DNR rules, and apply them automatically to your organization. So those are very hands-off ways to kind of get started with a bunch of different rules, a bunch of different threat feeds, just get up and going. The others that we'll mention, what differentiates them, so those will be APIs and feeds, is that they're essentially threat feeds or APIs that you get access to, but then you have to write a small DNR rule that will leverage it. The reason that we do it this way, that those are not one-click apply everywhere, is that in some cases, for example, the first one, the VirusTotal one, if you have a paying VirusTotal subscription with a paying key, you may not want to query all of the hashes in the same way across your whole organization, but maybe you want to say, for my general population of hosts, if 10 antivirus engines for VirusTotal say this is bad, then I want to report it. But I have, a production network. And then the production network, if even one engine from VirusTotal says this is bad, I want to generate a detection. And having those DNR rules is what allows you to kind of make that customization. So let's go through that list. We have, so the first one I mentioned, VirusTotal. It's free to get an API key. So feel free to just go. You can register, get an API key. It has limits. So there's a certain daily limit as well as a certain limit per minute. You, in the same way as the OTX, you have to go into the integrations and add your API key. Once you do that, you can register to the API VirusTotal, again from the Addons. And that gives you access to specifically say, take this hash and query it against VirusTotal. Now, there's a few things that are worth noting. So because, again, we run wire speed, and this is an external API, and there are sometimes limits on, in your API key. It means that this must be done in a best effort way. And what that translates into, practically speaking, is if you have a DNR rule that says take all the hashes coming from code identity events, so kind of deduplicated hashes, and you want to look them up against VT, as we do this lookup in real time, if, let's say, VirusTotal is down somehow, it should be extremely rare, what's going to happen is this is going to silently just keep going. Part of the logic here is that usually, again, it all depends on the specific scenarios, but the code identity event will reoccur because they're deduplicated per host, per reboot, per day, if I recall. So you're likely going to get that again. Alternatively, let's say that your key has hit the maximum of I think the free is 4 per minute. What's going to happen is that, again, we will just skip over it and keep going. Now, that's not great. And I mean, there's a bunch of different ways that, you can get a bigger key, all of these things. Realistically, one interesting feature that we have in LimaCharlie for the VirusTotal API that really makes this a lot easier is that we do a lot of caching. So as all of those things, as all of those hashes get looked up in VirusTotal, we cache those locally for a certain period of time. And what that means is that if you're getting 100,000 hashes from your organization, it's extremely unlikely that you're going to be doing 100,000 VirusTotal lookup. Because the first time that one of your hosts resolves, wininet.dll, that hash, that will get cached. And the next time that we see that hash again, we're not going to query VirusTotal, but instead we're going to short circuit all of this and give you the cached result extremely quickly. So in practice, you kind of end up getting a lot more mileage out of the VT integration in LimaCharlie than strictly considering the quota that you have on your API key. So that's really kind of the main API that, hey, you enable that free key, you're up and running, and you get kind of a lot of value very quickly from that. The others are threat feeds. So VT is an API. These are lookups. So you'll see that lookups are a subset of the resources, the add-ons that you can subscribe to. A lookup is very, very simply just a list of values, a key, and then a value. When you want to query something from LimaCharlie, let's say hashes or domain names or IPs, you take the IP that you see in an event and you say, is that IP in this list of bad IPs? There's metadata associated with that entry. So if it is in that list, then you're going to have details about what does that mean? Where is that IP coming from? And the match that will be produced, so the detection, the alert that will be produced, will contain that metadata. So in LimaCharlie, we mirror a whole bunch of different threat feeds. So some of them are, so they're all public free threat feeds, like Talos IP Blacklist, Alien Vault, public IP Reputation. Abuse.ch also has a bunch of different feeds that are kind of specialized for various things. So those will be mirrored. But there's also community feeds. So, for example, we have the global hash and the crimeware IPs feeds that have been added recently from SockSotter, which is an MSSP using LimaCharlie. And they and anybody else is able to kind of create those feeds and make them public on LimaCharlie. So in their case, I believe they're updating those every 4 hours from various sources that they have. You'll see some information around, in the add-on section, some information about what those are. And you just click subscribe, and that gives your organization access to those. Now, both for APIs and lookups, I've kind of mentioned, that's half of the equation. Getting access to it is half the equation. The other half is actually doing the lookups for those. So doing the actual lookup, you have to create the DNR rule. Don't be scared. That's very easy. And specifically, we're going to give you 4 examples here, because they're usually very generic, at least to begin with, until you want to really customize it. So let's start with VirusTotal in the same order that we did this. So VirusTotal, the logical way that you want to query it against VirusTotal is fairly straightforward. So we want to do a we want to do a lookup. So that's the operation for our rule. The type of events that we want to do the lookup from is code identity, so deduplicated hashes. we want to do the lookup based on the main hash. In LimaCharlie, if you see a hash, the generic form of the hash is always SHA-256. Code identity also has MD5 and SHA-1. In this case, we'll just simplify and just look up the SHA-256. The resource, so what we want to look up against is, so LCR, LimaCharlie resource, // so like a URL, API, VT. So we want to query the VirusTotal API. So, the first part at the top here is saying, take the code identities, take the hash, query them on VT. The second part here at the bottom is where we say, okay, not only do I want to query VT, but I want to, decide the threshold. So VirusTotal returns to you the number or the list of antivirus engines that it supports that have detected this hash as being malicious in some form. So in this case, we're defining a metadata rule, which just says, hey, whatever comes back from the VT API, I want to apply this subrule to this. And it's super straightforward. In this case, we're saying, I want to say if the length of, so it's a list, again, it's the list of antiviruses that say this is bad. So if the length of that list is greater than 3, consider that a match. So taken as a whole, this rule here will very simply look up all the hashes coming from code identities. And if there's more than 3 AV engines saying this is bad, generate a detection. Simple as that. You can customize this. Obviously, you could have like a top level rule that looks for a sensor tag. So maybe you want to only do those VT lookups for, agents that are tagged VIP, for example. It's my go-to example. Or change the threshold. You could also end this, with various other clauses. The second one, so we'll move to the second kind of generic list, and it's for IP lookups. So a bunch of the feeds, the lookups that are in LimaCharlie are for IP addresses. So this is a generic rule where we will say, okay, we want to do a lookup. The events are network connections. So network connections event is a slightly batched together list of network connections per process that occur. If I recall, it's every 30 seconds or something like that. So it's just more efficient, and it's what is enabled by default. If you don't customize the types of events you want to get from your endpoint. So again, this is meant kind of as a quick default that will work out of the box. And I want to take event network activity question mark here. The question mark, it represents, tells the DNR rule to ignore whether it's a source or destination. We just treat it all, I want all IP addresses from this. And take the IP address. Again, those will, we don't really care if they're IPv6, IPv4. We're going to assume that the feed in Alien Vault IP reputation, this example, contains perhaps both. It doesn't matter if we get an IPv6 from the event and it queries that threat feed, it's just not going to find it. No problem, no harm done. So this will, and I guess, yes, the resource. So again, LCR, LimaCharlie resource, lookup. So it's a different type. It's not an API type. It's a lookup type. And Alien Vault IP reputation, which is the name of the resource we subscribe to. So if you enable that, you create that DNR rule. Obviously, that's kind of the detection part. On the response part, you can just create, action report. Name and then name of the detection that you want to generate. Extremely straightforward. So that's for IPs. Domains, the other very common type of threat feed that we'll query. In this example, we're using the malware domains feed that we will look for. And we say that, okay, again, look up against DNS requests. Very obvious. The domain name within those requests, straightforward. Normalize all this to lowercase, to kind of normalize, because we don't care about case in domains. and query malware domains, and that's it. Those are, there's only really one location for DNS requests that get produced, from Mac, Windows, Chrome. They're all normalized, so it's a straightforward rule like that. Finally, for hashes, you'll see that it's a little bit similar to the VirusTotal one, except we've added a tiny bit of complexity here. So this example, we're using the lookup global hash. So that's the big feed provided by SockSotter and LimaCharlie. And the reason it's slightly more complex is because we want to look up, we know that it's a mix of hash types. So we want to look up the SHA-56, the MD5, and the SHA-1 of all the code identities that we get. So to do that, we make the top level of our DNR rule an OR. So because we're going to essentially take 3 different rules and just say if one of them, A or B or C matches, consider that a match. We only care about code identity event that contains all those hashes. And as I said, we're going to OR those 3 rules. And again, those 3 rules, we're saying look up the hash or the hash MD5 or the hash SHA-1 against this specific resource. So against that threat feed. As straightforward as this. Once you do that, you just do report or whatever that is, and you're good to go. So that's kind of the overview. What I can, so that's really kind of the overview of the main forms of of capabilities that you can get out of LimaCharlie very quickly, out of the box, without having to put your own feeds, without having to create your own resources. Obviously, those are also free, but there's a few non-free resources. For example, we produce a cutting edge feed as well that you can use that kind of contain very cutting edge forms of like a threat feed, so hashes, IPs, domains, that we also update very frequently. You can obviously also feel free to create your own. So you can not only create your own lookup, for example, of a threat feed that is private or public. You can make it public if you want. And if you're interested also in providing some feeds, but perhaps you have a threat intel shop that is producing very high quality feeds or very specialized feeds, you can get in touch with us, and we're also able to put your feed in a public paying fashion through the LimaCharlie small marketplace, so that if somebody wants to subscribe to it, they can do it, and it works exactly the same way, except that they'll be billed per endpoint per month usually, and it's as straightforward as that. So this tends to be a bit more of a straightforward topic. So I know that we have a pretty strong delay again on the stream. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll wait a little bit more. Otherwise, go for it. Create a LimaCharlie account. It's free. Create an org. It's free. It has a 2 free sensor tier. So there's kind of no real reason not to get playing with it, develop some roles, see the types of events, types of telemetry that you get back from LimaCharlie. In some ways you can use LimaCharlie almost for detonation, in a VM if you want to see the detailed behavior of what's going on. And yeah, that's it. I guess I should note also that there's another type of resource that you can use, which is the detections. And what those are, it's a DNR rule. It's the detection half of a DNR rule, just like this. And you can subscribe to them. And if you look in our documentation, you can create yourself a rule that embeds this kind of encapsulated rule. It's a little bit less straightforward. But we also have, some detections that are made public that you can just apply to your organization as well. Cool. So I don't think there's really any questions. If there are, feel free, get in touch with us again. Very approachable. There's also the public Slack community at the bottom of our main webpage that you can get access to. And we answer questions. The community answer questions. You can get in touch with us in a semi-private way as well. Cool. All right. Well, thanks. See you around.